I cannot believe that it's August already and back to school is here or on deck for most of us. That means new rhythms and routines, whether figuring out how to get out the door in the morning or having a plan for what happens between the end of the school day and dinner and beyond. Fat Brain Toys is here to help with at least one aspect of that new schedule. With their fidget and sensory toys that help busy brains unwind at the end of a long day, Fat Brain Toys offers a variety of child-driven play experiences that will keep both their mind and their body active. Almost all of the toys and games are screen-free, but what I appreciate most about Fat Brain Toys is that they encourage kids to get creative and explore the world around them through open-ended play. And if you have a young builder, architect, sculptor, maker living under your roof, you'll want to check out the Plip Kit. It comes with over 45 flexible pieces kids can use to create complex prisms, swirling patterns, really anything that they want. And the special Plip Connect system is designed with easy ball and socket ends that make this flexible construction kit an especially satisfying experience for kids who may be working on their fine and gross motor skills. Fat Brain Toys is a family-run business that has been curating and creating quality toys, games, and gifts that both entertain and educate for more than 20 years. Fat Brain has put together a collection of toys for our families. Go to fatbraintoys.com/tilt to get 10% off all the items in the Tilt collection when you use the code TILT at checkout. And find out for yourself why Fat Brain Toys is a smarter way to play.
In the moment that behavior happens, where I'm not implying it doesn't have grave consequences, but in that moment, it 100% matches what's happening in that person's inner world. Memory, autonomic nervous system, all the things, the ways they all come together. Now, in the next moment, it could change because we change moment to moment in all of those ways, in the way we're processing information. But in that moment, that behavior is an adaptive response to what's happening inside that person's nervous system.
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. If you've ever used the word baffling when describing your child's behavior, this episode is for you. My guest is Robyn Gobbel, an expert in relational neuroscience and interpersonal neurobiology, the author of Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors, Brain-Body Sensory Strategies That Really Work, and the host of the podcast, The Baffling Behavior Show. As a psychologist, Robyn has always been passionate about working with those kids who have more tricky or extreme behaviors, and she does that by harnessing the power of neuroscience. Through her work with families, she decodes the latest brain science into easy-to-understand principles and metaphors to help parents become an expert in their child's behavior. During this episode, Robyn and I explore the core issues underlying nearly all struggles in children, dysregulation, disconnection, or feeling unsafe, and how understanding the brain's operation in either connection mode or protection mode can transform our approach to parenting. We also touched upon Robyn's metaphors for the 3 brain states, the owl, the watchdog, and the possum, which can help us better understand and respond to our children's needs. I have a hunch many of you will resonate with Robyn's experience of feeling like she wasn't doing enough for the kids she was working with, or that it was her fault they continued to struggle. I know I did. And I also find the reminder that it takes time to figure out how to best support our kids and ourselves empowering and optimistic. I hope you feel the same after listening to this episode. Hey, Robyn, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Debbie.
I was mentioning before we hit record that it was someone in my community referenced your book, which is called Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors, Brain-Body Sensory Strategies That Really Work. And I was like, okay, that ticks all the boxes for the kinds of things that I want to personally know about and that I know this community of listeners would want to hear more about. So we're going to get into that, but would you take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about your work in the world and also your personal why that brought you to be doing this?
Yes. I'll start with my professional background, and I think that will lead us into some of the personal stuff. But I was a therapist. I always have wanted to be a therapist. I wanted to work with kids with the hardest behaviors always. I found the memoirs of this woman named Tori Hayden when I was in high school. And she's a special education teacher, worked with the kids really nobody else knew what to do with. And I remember being like, that's it. Like, that's what I want to do. So when I finished graduate school, that's what I did. I went right into working with the kids that really nobody else wanted to work with. Nobody else knew what to do with. There was this kind of chronic, like, I don't know what to do. You take them. And I, of course, had no idea what to do either. But there was nobody else for me to ask. And there was nobody else for me to send them to. I was kind of the end of the line. So I was very committed to figuring out what's happening with these kids. Why are these behaviors happening? The kids that I work with at that point in particular are kids that had histories of very serious, complex attachment developmental trauma. They were having behaviors that certainly you weren't reading about in parenting books. They absolutely weren't responding to the kinds of parenting that were written about in parenting books. And their parents were lost and overwhelmed and felt like everybody was constantly giving up on them, which they kind of were. So I just felt like I didn't want to be one more of those people. I'm a pretty tenacious person in general. And I kind of took the challenge up, I guess, of trying to figure out, like, what is happening here? These behaviors are so baffling. Like, why are they happening? That led me to discover interpersonal neurobiology in the field of relational neuroscience, which doesn't exactly tell you what to do, but it gave me a really great kind of framework, or I like to say map, of like human behavior and what happens when things go a little awry. And so over the years, I've just integrated different aspects of relational neuroscience into my work with kids as a play therapist, worked very, very closely with their families. And then about 5 years ago, I closed my practice in Austin, Texas. I was a full-time outpatient psychotherapist, right? Saw kids and families all day long, every day. And I closed my practice to move my family across the country, thinking I would reopen a practice, but then the pandemic happened. And so everybody just kind of had to pivot. And I was doing a lot of teaching and training anyway. So I really just leaned into that. There are professionals who need support, because the professionals are still saying the same thing they were 20 years ago. I don't know what to do. I can't help you. And I really don't want families to hear that from a professional. So I work really, really hard to train professionals and help them feel supported. And then I have an online community for the parents. So I still get to work directly with the parents who are really alone.
Okay, that brought up a lot of questions for me already that are not on my list of questions. But I guess I'm curious to know, when you went to grad school and you were focusing on these things, what kind of therapy were you doing? And I ask this because I recently released an episode on the limitations and challenges of traditional therapy with neurodivergent people. And so I'm just kind of curious, because I'm so interested in what trained psychotherapists do and don't know. So I'm just curious, where did you come up against the limitations?
Some of the limitations were undoubtedly the fact that I was brand new to the field, right? And there's just kind of an element of that there's just no way around that. Everybody has to be new for a while. But without question, my professional background, my training had largely been in cognitive-based models, and then what I would call traditional child-centered play therapy, which tends to involve kids being able to do symbolic and metaphor-based play. What I didn't know then, but I do know now, is that kids with the level of attachment trauma and complex trauma that I was working with and continue to work with, cognitive interventions, well, first of all, are essentially useless. Even good metaphor, symbolic, play-based interventions really aren't what kids need at that stage, the stage that I was getting them at, which is that they were a step away from needing inpatient care. I was getting hurt at work. I mean, things were being thrown at me. I was bit. I had a black eye once. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to contain or de-escalate kids. And for some reason, I thought they were going to play with a dollhouse. Yeah, it wasn't happening.
That sounds like a hard job. So what was it that kept you moving forward instead of saying, you know what, this is not what I signed up for, I'm out?
I think in some ways it's a little hard to articulate. There was just never an option. I've never wanted to do anything else. And in this specific specific realm, I'm not like this in all areas of my life, but in the specific realm, I just wanted to understand why. And especially like other therapists are telling me this works, but either I'm doing it very wrong, right? Like I was having the same experience parents have, right? Like everyone's saying this works, so I must be doing this wrong. Or this is not what these kids need. And if it's not what these kids need, I don't know what they need. And I just felt really committed to finding out. I would assume that there was a part of me that really saw myself in these kids and really wanted to be the grown-up that didn't give up on them, and also didn't stay focused on their badness, right? Like could really continue to see something's wrong.
So you mentioned earlier that it was discovering relational neuroscience and interpersonal neurobiology that marked a shift for you and opened up your eyes to a direction that could really work for these clients that you were working with. Can you define what that is, just so we're all on the same page?
Yeah. Interpersonal neurobiology, which is where I stumbled first, is a theory of human development that was put into the world by Dr. Dan Siegel. And it is a way of bringing together many, many diverse fields of study and then conceptualizing human development. And when I first heard Dr. Siegel talk, I heard him on a CD. I was driving down the road, and I just remember just that bolt of like, oh my gosh, finally something makes sense. And also finally something has a lot of hope in it. We're not sitting here pathologizing, not just kids with behavior problems, but frankly, humans. I mean, so much of our theories of human development and our theories of behavior change is kind of grounded in the idea that humans are bad unless we, make them uncomfortable enough to be good. And I do not believe that. And I didn't want to believe that. I don't know. I guess there was a part of me that was like, that's kind of a crummy job. I don't think I was having these thoughts at the time, but his work and the way he talked about people, and this continues to be one of the things I respect most about Dr. Siegel, is he's so hopeful and he's so respectful of how he talks about people, including people who we could objectively say have very bad behavior. So it felt like the first time somebody could begin to offer what might kind of be wrong, quote unquote wrong, what was being disrupted in these kids whose behaviors were not inviting connection at all. Nobody wanted to be in a relationship with these kids. And Dr. Siegel was really offering an idea about how at their core, they absolutely wanted to be connected like all humans do, but what was getting in the way of that? And from Dr. Siegel's work, then I started to discover his colleagues, Dr. Alan Shore in regulation theory, eventually, like Dr. Stephen Porges and polyvagal theory, Dr. Bruce Perry, a neurosequential model of therapeutics. And there's so many more. There's so many more. Those are just the ones that I tend to spend the most time with on a day-to-day basis. Interpersonal neurobiology is like expanded into this broader field of relational neuroscience. Like that's kind of an umbrella title for these fields of study and theories that are focused on the brain and the nervous system, the relational pieces of the brain and the nervous system.
I want to get into your book in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you, you wrote about your aha moment where you first learned of the idea that no behavior was maladaptive, and that was really hard for you to kind of wrap your head around. And it was for me too. And I think about that's a term that I use. And I think for me, there's so many assumptions that we make in the language that we use and supporting families. And for me, even reading that was a reminder that everything has to be questioned. But could you talk about that aha for you and what that meant?
It's funny the details you remember, right? Like I'm in the back row of this enormous conference with my friends, right? Like I was interested in the conference for sure, but I was probably more interested in the social experience that we were having there. And Bonnie Badenoch, who has since become like my primary closest mentor, was early in the day said that she believed no behavior was maladaptive. And I had a similar response as you kind of described just now, which is, what? I'm sorry, but these kids have real maladaptive behaviors. Like they're bad and they're unsafe. They're crossing other people's boundaries, all this kind of stuff. And also this sense of like, I thought maladaptive was almost like a generous word, right? Like implicit in the word maladaptive for me, the way I was using it was the behaviors had once been adaptive. And they had served this child inside their traumatic experience or, their previous experiences, and they'd been adaptive and they'd really needed them. It's just that they're no longer adaptive anymore. And so again, I thought this was this really respectful, generous language that really focused on that piece of it. Also, I really trusted Bonnie Badenoch, who is a leader in interpersonal neurobiology and turning it into clinical practice. So I had a conflict, like, no, that's kind of bonkers, but also, the person saying it, I trust. So I think I need to pause and get a little curious about that. And I did, and I called some colleagues, and there was also that kind of moment I think a lot of us can have, which is like, well, if you think that, you clearly don't know the kinds of kids I work with, right? So I call my colleagues who are like working with the same kinds of colleagues I worked with and ultimately asked Bonnie if we could study together, if she would take me on as a consultee. And she said yes. And then that's when like the theory of interpersonal neurobiology and polyvagal theory, specifically those two, shifted for me from like head knowledge to body knowledge. And as I went along and understood so much more, I mean, memory science is a huge piece of the idea that, no behavior is maladaptive. Autonomic nervous system, the stress response system, like as I started to more intricately understand all these different pieces in the way that she already did, I was able to not just like trust her because I trusted her as a mentor, but understand how she came to that conclusion that in the moment that behavior happens, where I'm not implying it doesn't have grave consequences, but in that moment, it 100% matches what's happening in that person's inner world. Memory, autonomic nervous system, all the things, the ways they all come together. Now, in the next moment, it could change because we change moment to moment in all of those ways, in the way we're processing information. But in that moment, that behavior is an adaptive response to what's happening inside that person's nervous system. And for some people, that might seem like we're really splitting hairs. Okay, is that adaptive? Is that maladaptive? I mean, it's still got consequences. I think for some people, it feels like we're really splitting hairs. But for me, it changed everything. It changed how I approached my work. It changed how I approached these kids. It changed what I was feeling in my body. It changed what I felt about myself. It changed everything.
It's a big concept. I read it that way as well. So thanks for walking us through that. I want to dive into your book. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll do that. In these hot, humid August days in the Northeast, it's really easy to get dehydrated, especially if you're out and about exercising or gardening or just running around juggling all the things like the parent you are. But what I've learned is that being optimally hydrated involves more than just making sure you drink enough water or lemonade or iced tea. The science shows that it means optimizing your body's fluid ratios, including electrolytes. That's why these days I've been staying hydrated with Element. Element is a zero-sugar drink mix designed for better hydration, created with a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium. That strong dose of electrolytes matters because while electrolyte deficiency or imbalance can cause headaches, cramps, fatigue, brain fog, and weakness, optimal electrolyte levels can help do things like reduce muscle cramps, promote better sleep, and support better digestion. Since I've been taking Element, I've noticed a boost in my energy levels and also just feeling more generally on top of things when it comes to my ability to do focused, productive work. And I'm pretty psyched about that because I'm juggling perhaps a few too many things at the moment and I need all the help I can get. Element has a special free gift with purchase for our Tilt parenting community. Get your free Element sample pack with any purchase at drinkelement.com/tilt. That's drinklmnt.com/tilt. Also, try the new Element Sparkling, a bold 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water. There seems to be so much change in the air these days, and of course, back to school is a biggie that most everyone is navigating. New school rhythms, new schedules for things like OT or tutoring or sports or enrichment activities. It can be hard to keep track of it all, especially when we're dealing with some executive function challenges. The mental load of parenting is real. But this school year, there is help. Enter Skylight Calendar. Skylight Calendar is a smart touchscreen calendar and organizer for all your chores, groceries, meals, and to-dos. It automatically syncs Google, Apple, and other digital calendars your family uses and shows them all together in one beautiful touchscreen display. Skylight Calendar is super easy to set up. Seriously, I did it in under 5 minutes. And in addition to syncing with everyone's calendars, you can also add events directly using the touchscreen or with the free Skylight mobile app. And yes, you can color code them, which truly makes my heart sing. Beyond the calendar, it's got those optional features like a chore chart complete with emoji celebrations when a task is checked off. There's the dinner planning, grocery list, to-do list, daily weather display, and weather forecast based on the address of your events. It's pretty much a lovely digital command central for the whole family. The bonus, when the calendar is not in use, you can turn it into a digital picture frame. As a special limited time offer for our listeners, get $40 off your purchase of a Skylight calendar when you go to skylightcal.com/tilt. That's skylightcal.com/tilt. These days, I'm embracing any and all systems and products that give me simple ways to support my family while reducing my personal stress. And that's exactly what HelloFresh is all about. With HelloFresh, I can skip trips to the grocery store and make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. Side note, HelloFresh was the very first meal kit our family started using years ago. In fact, it was over HelloFresh dinners that I talked with Darren and Ash about my big plans for Tilt Parenting way back when. And it was through HelloFresh that we really started adding food diversity and a love of cooking back into our lives. With the changing menu of 50 recipes to choose from each week, HelloFresh makes it easy to always find something that will hit the spot for everyone in the family. Their easy-to-follow recipes include pre-portioned ingredients delivered fresh, so no last-minute grocery store run required. Just choose your delivery date, open your box, and get cooking. And HelloFresh's line of kid-friendly family options means even the pickiest of eaters will be part of the Clean Plate Club this back-to-school season. And Green Chef, who is also a sponsor of this show, is now owned by HelloFresh. And with a wider array of meal plans to choose from, there's really something for everyone. I love switching between the brands, and now my listeners can enjoy both brands at a discount with me. And for a limited time, kids eat free. Go to HelloFresh.com/tiltkids to unlock this exclusive offer. 1 free kids meal per box for 2 months while your subscription is active. That's free kids meals just by going to HelloFresh.com/tiltkids. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. Your book is called Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors, Brain Body Sensory Strategies That Really Work. And I want to go into some of the concepts in there. And I just want to start with one of the core tenets that you said. You mentioned that this is an aha, a la Kids Do Well When They Can. Ross Green, who I just interviewed yesterday to talk about CPS with young kids. But you said that regulated, connected kids who feel safe behave well. And I read that. And I will say, like, personally, I felt judged as soon as I read it. I'm like, oh, so I'm not creating a safe environment. Like, I immediately interpreted it that way. And I had to really sit with it and understand what you were really saying. Can you explain what you mean by that concept?
I absolutely can. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to. A lot of folks have that reaction, and I don't do that on purpose. I am not somebody who creates intensity on purpose for effect. But I have learned over the years that that is an experience with how that lands with folks. And what I'm understanding is that there is a lot of misconceptions about what felt safety is and what the parent's job is and their kids' sense of safety and connection and regulation. And that piece there's been this way that parents have started to believe that that is their job. And they have total control over that in their kid. And so if their kid isn't those things, that it's the parent's fault, which couldn't be further from the truth. Parents have a lot of ways that they can influence their children's regulation, connection, and felt safety, which is why I wrote that book. Why I work with parents, because there's so many ways we can influence these experiences in our kids, but we are not in charge of it. We are not in control of it. So for me, regulating connected kids who feel safe, and a lot of times I say do well, but for people who are new to this way of thinking, they tend to relate a little bit more to the word behave well. So I kind of go in and out of shifting those. For me, it's not a checklist. It's not get your kid regulated, get them connected, get them feeling safe, and now you've got good kids. It's not a checklist. It's an invitation for curiosity. So when our kids are struggling, and then we start to get dysregulated, inevitably, that's how brains and nervous systems work. If we can find a way to hold close to curiosity and ask ourselves, what's going on with my kid? Is this a regulation issue? Is this a connection to me or to themselves? Or is this a felt safety? Now, the truth is, it's almost impossible to really silo those pieces out. But there are some things that fall into these different categories a little bit more clearly than others. And so I still think it's a helpful thought experiment. More than anything, that keeps us connected to the idea that something is wrong. My kid is struggling. And I might not even be able to fix that. It might not actually even be my job to fix that. But if I can see their struggles as a reflection of the state of their regulation, the state of their connection to me and to themselves, and their experience of felt safety, that means I'm not making big characterological judgments about my kid or myself, right? They become a kid who's struggling instead of a bad kid. And the kids that I work with, whose behaviors are so outrageous and so confusing, all the adults in their lives are looking at them as though they're bad kids. And the adults aren't bad for looking at the kids that way. The adults are just being normal, right? And taking a step back from that, even the biggest behaviors, and remembering this is about regulation, connection, felt safety, is huge in the way that you approach that kid.
Yeah. I think it was Mona Delahook who mentioned this idea of a dysregulated child, like instead of what's going on with you, what does your nervous system need right now? And just asking that question totally changes how you respond to and show up for a kid who's having a hard time.
For sure. And I really believe that it's true across the board, that if a kid is struggling, that there's something going on, regulation, connection, or felt safety. And I don't like to get too binary and too rigid, but I actually think that it is that clear. I also think that humans are supposed to struggle sometimes. Being dysregulated is a part of our developmental process of becoming who we are. Not dysregulation isn't inherently bad, right? I'm not aiming to get my kid to be regulated all the time. And sometimes we aren't experiencing safety. And that's just, again, that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's bad and it's better to be safe, experiencing safety, but it's not necessarily something as parents we're supposed to be rushing in and changing or fixing, things like that.
Okay. I've done what I tend to do, which is I go deep before I do the overview. So I'm going to zoom out for a second because I want to make sure that you have a moment to talk about the broad strokes of your book, who you wrote it for. My audience is parents of neurodivergent kids, probably many of whom have experienced trauma. Almost all, if not all, have very sensitive nervous systems and so forth. So can you tell us about your goal with the book and who it's really for?
Yes, because I had very clear goals. I didn't want to write another book. I just didn't want to waste people's time. Parents don't have time for this stuff. Again, I've said my history is working with kids with serious complex trauma and attachment trauma, though over the years, my audience has gotten broader. And now we talk about vulnerable nervous systems and big baffling behaviors. So kids who are neurodivergent. I have a lot of parents of kids with neuroimmune disorders. I have my own intimate familiarity with neuroimmune disorders. So I have a lot of experience supporting those folks. I wanted to write a book for families who didn't feel seen in the other parenting books that they were reading. And these are not bad parenting books. These are amazing parenting books that I've read and benefited from. And the added component of what I call the baffling piece, that moment of like, what on earth? This makes no sense at all, either because the stress response is so sensitive, or the kids that have attachment trauma have ways of navigating their stress that is different than kids who haven't experienced attachment trauma. And generally speaking, most adults are very, very baffled by that. So I wanted to write a book for those families, for the ones who felt like even these other great parenting books that I get a lot out of still feels like I'm not totally seen in the pages of this book. And then I wanted to try to write a book that took into account my understanding of how like the brain changes and how adults can become more regulated, because most of the adults that I work with, they know a lot of stuff. They've read all the books. They've listened to every podcast. They know the things, and they can't still do the things they want to do. And that was certainly true of the parents in my clinical practice. And what was different in my clinical work with them is that they were having this very intensely relational experience with me. And they were getting this experience of co-regulation, and they were getting the experience of compassion, like over and over and over and over again. They heard me talk about their kids' behaviors with compassion, and ultimately they came to understand that I felt the same way about them. Then they could start to feel that way about themselves. And that is, in my experience, a crucial, non-negotiable piece of this equation of taking theory and tools and actually being able to use them. And it's not even for me about being able to use the tools. It's about feeling better in your own body. And when you feel better in your own body, you're going to be able to use the tools that you want to use in your parenting, at least some of the time. I mean, not all the time. And I really challenged myself to think, can I take what I understand about how the brain changes and heals in relationship? Is there any way I can do that in a book? And I wasn't sure, but I tried to take what I knew, and I tried to take what people were telling me from listening to my podcast or getting my emails. And I tried to like merge that together with what I understood about like interpersonal neurobiology. And that inspired me to write the book in a slightly different way, where the beginning of every chapter is a mom who's coming to parent coaching with me, and I write it in first person. So I really narrate my own inner experience, what's happening for me, what my thoughts are for me, which I have found to be a really helpful part of the healing journey with the families I work with. And I thought, well, maybe families who read this book could, maybe they could believe me, I guess. Maybe they could believe I really feel this way about my clients. And there comes a point where all humans inevitably ask themselves, like, well, what makes me so different or so special that I don't deserve this?
Thank you. Let's take a quick break and we'll get into some more of the concepts. So many conversations I'm having with parents in the Tilt community these days are about what we can do to foster our kids' love of learning and empower them to create meaningful lives for themselves as they grow. If you're recognizing that a traditional educational path is likely not part of this process for your child, I want to be sure you know about K-12 powered schools, which can help your child reach their full potential and give you the support you need to get them there. K-12 powered schools are accredited, tuition-free online public schools for students in kindergarten through 12th grade, designed with an engaging curriculum that supports individual learning styles. With K-12, learning is personalized and provides the flexibility your family needs. When school can be anywhere there's internet access, they can learn at their own pace in their own place. And K-12 powered schools have state-certified teachers specially trained in teaching online. They utilize hands-on innovative technology to make the learning interactive. K-12 powered schools even offer social opportunities, extracurricular activities, and in-person events. K-12 has more than 20 years experience helping students gain the skills they need to thrive in the future. Join more than 2 million families who've chosen K-12 and empower your student to reach their full potential now. Go to k12.com/tilt today to learn more and find a tuition-free K-12 powered school near you. That's the letter K, the number 12.com/tilt. k12.com/tilt.
Feel your max with Brooks Running and the all-new Ghost Max 2. They're the shoes you deserve, designed to streamline your stride and help protect your body. Treat yourself to feel-good landings on an ultra-high stack of super comfy nitrogen-infused cushion that takes the edge off every step, every day. The Brooks Ghost Max 2. You know, technically, they're a form of self-care. Brooks, let's run there. Head to brooksrunning.com to learn more.
Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside. Before we move on, I loved that format. It was like kind of a composite parent that you were talking with. I think her name was Nat. Is that right?
Yes, Nat. Yep.
I just really enjoyed that because it was really validating and you really addressed all the insecurities or the invalidation that so many parents have experienced time and time again with so many people. And as you said in the very beginning, like going to a specialist, a therapist for help and having them say, we can't help you, we've never seen this before, this is too, whatever. I mean, that is a really low point for any parent to have to experience that. And one of the dialogues in there, I really appreciated. Nat said, well, aren't you going to tell me what to do? And you said, well, haven't other people told you what to do? Like, how's that working for you? You know, essentially. And I really just appreciated that. And I think because we do want answers, we want help, we want answers, we want strategies. And I so appreciated how everything that you're doing in the book, you demonstrate in the way that you work with the parents. And I thought that was really effective. And it opens the reader up, I think, in a way that most books don't.
That is lovely to hear. I mean, that was a great summary of really what I'd hoped, especially that part where you just said the things I was teaching in the book are coming through my relationship with Nat, which is a wonderful way for people to learn. And people are making neural networks of them in relationship with me, frankly, as they're reading the book. They're feeling in relationship with me and they're making a neural network out of that. And there's a part of me that's really uncomfortable to say, I want people to make a neural network of me in their minds. Like there's something about that feels just uncomfortable, but that is what I want. It doesn't have to be me. I want people to make a neural network in their minds of somebody who's like holding these core truths, not just about their kids, but about them, right? Their behavior is not maladaptive either, even though parents have told me some pretty fascinating things, right? It's not maladaptive. It makes perfect sense. And I'm not judging them for it, right? And that I can have authentic, I mean, you know, when somebody is not being honest with you with like their compassion, it feels like pity. I don't care if the neural network that parents make is of me or of someone else who gives them those things. But I also know there aren't enough people giving parents those things. And I wanted to try to fill that gap in an accessible way.
Yeah. And I think so many parents, the big feelings that they're feeling, right? The way that their own nervous systems get triggered, the things that they get anxious and stressed about, the sense of failure, all of those things, they tend to mirror exactly what our kids are experiencing. And so to be able to then experience what it feels like to be seen and have that sense of felt safety, then that allows us to be like, okay, now I know better how to provide that for my child. I thought that was really cool. So in the book, you say that there are two modes that our brains are in at any given time, connection or protection. That's the first time I had even thought of that. And you say there's no gray area in between. You're in one or the other. I would love if you could just explain that a little bit, because I think our kids probably spend a lot of time in the protection mode.
If we look at Dr. Porges's polyvagal theory and his idea of neuroception, and he's not the only one who is talking about these concepts and the science in this way. This is just the work I'm most familiar with. But the work of polyvagal theory and neuroception tells us that the brain is constantly taking in information from what's happening out in the environment, from what's happening in the relationship that we're in right now, and what's happening inside our bodies. And it's actually even way more complicated than that, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just keep it at that for now. That we're taking in the information from these three places, and the information is either giving us cues of safety or cues of danger. And not a lot of stuff is this binary, but safe or not safe is binary in the nervous system. And I kind of think of it as like buckets of safety or danger. And if there's more safety in the bucket than there is cues of danger, then the nervous system is going to experience safety and rest into connection mode, which is its default. We're really longing to be in this safe, socially engaged connection mode, which doesn't necessarily mean we're engaged with other people. That connection to ourself, as well as all sorts of other things, nature, pets, is a very valid form of connection. But when we're taking in all these cues from these three different places, if there's more cues of safety than there are cues of danger, we're going to rest into connection mode. When the nervous system, through this concept called neuroception, neuroceives more cues of danger than cues of safety, it is going to switch over into protection mode. From there, the intensity of protection mode can very much really vary. It's like a dimmer switch, right? It's on or off, but once it's on, it can be tiny bit on or like all the way on. You know, we can be in protection mode enough to be like, wait a minute, I think something might not be right here. Let me check it out. Oh, actually, everything's fine, right? Or we can move all the way into like, okay, I'm in danger and I need the energy in my arms and my legs and my mouth to protect myself so I can return to safety. The goal is always safety.
Yeah, super helpful. Okay, thank you for breaking that down for us. And what I really want to get into, and we can't go into too much detail, but you have a whole section on fixing those behaviors. I love the way that you talk about the owl brain, the watchdog, and the possum brain. To me, it seems like the owl brain is kind of like where we want to be, right? That's like the green zone or something. And tell me if this is wrong, but I think of the watchdog, I read that as kind of like the fight or flight, and the possum as being more like the freeze or fawn mode. You offer strategies for all of those, and you say, let's fix those behaviors. But what are you really providing parents through that section of the book in terms of how to address the way that their child's brain is wired?
What I'm really offering is tools that invite regulation, connection, and felt safety, right? That the more we can bring our kids in any given moment into regulation, connection, felt safety, again, we're not in control. We can extend invitations because it's kind to help people feel safe when they are safe, right? That our kids with sensitized stress response systems and behavior problems, they're feeling unsafe when they objectively are safe, right? Like if there's a kid who's objectively not safe and is having a lot of fight-flight behaviors, those kids make sense. They still need support and services, but those kids aren't getting referred to services in the same way these other kids are getting referred to services. The problem is that it feels to everyone around them like it doesn't match. That objectively speaking, this kid is safe, but they're having these behaviors that are suggesting that they're not feeling safe, regulated, or connected. And so I'm a former play therapist. So I kind of developed a way to be with kids and helping them understand themselves, which is where this like playful metaphor came up with, because it's so important for kids to de-shame their behaviors and understand themselves. So that's where that playful metaphor came from. And then the adults love the metaphor as well. They report that they feel simple, and there is something very endearing about an adult talking to me about their watchdog brain. It's just so precious. But I want regulation, connection, and felt safety. I want to offer those tools.
One of the quotes I pulled out, you said, ultimately, we cannot change anyone else's behavior or nervous system. We can make a lot of offers of connection, felt safety, and co-regulation, but we're not responsible for those offers being received. And that felt really important to me.
Yeah. I hope it feels really true and also still really hopeful that struggling kids is painful. But when we think our kids are struggling because it's our fault, it's crushing.
It is. My episode from last week was Christina Kuzmich, and she wrote a book called I Can Fix This and Other Lies I Told Myself While Parenting My Struggling Child. And we spent a lot of time talking about that pain of feeling like this is somehow my fault. I really appreciated that. I'm going to ask you one more question. You have a section in the book called Why Knowing Isn't Even Half the Battle. Say more about that.
So that's the third section that's really focused on parents and helping parents. I mean, people ask me this question literally every day. I know all these things. Why aren't I doing them? Then they make meaning out of that. Like, I must not really want them, or I must be. The brain makes all sorts of fascinating stories that are almost always not true. And the reason parents know lots of things and can't do them is the same reason that kids are struggling. Very few kids are misbehaving because they don't know the right thing to do. Almost never is that the problem. And the same with parents. Like, if all I had to do was learn something, I would do it perfectly that doesn't, like, I say it out loud and everyone's like, oh, of course. I mean, of course not. And so helping parents really take the theory I've already laid out for their kids and start to apply it back to themselves now allows us to step into a place of having self-compassion. And then self-compassion for me is like the number one thing to help our nervous system rest back into connection mode. And when you're parenting a kid whose behaviors are totally out of control, it's important to figure out a way to feel better before your kid's behaviors are going to change. We can't wait for that.
We'll be waiting a long time, potentially.
Yes. Exactly. Which is completely unacceptable. And it's very, very hard. And it also is possible to, what I would say, grow your owl brain, stay even at the fraction of a second more regulated, and slowly over time, have your nervous system spend a little more time in connection mode. Because it's very bad for our bodies to live chronically in protection mode. And it explains why we can know all these things. I know a lot of things about parenting, and my kid edits my podcast, and we giggle about this, about like, mom.
That's awesome.
Like, yeah. We're not even for perfection here. We're doing the best we can. Right. And same goes for me. I mess up with my kid every day.
1,000%. Yeah. And I just like that reminder. It's a nice note to end this on too, that I think it can feel counterintuitive in some ways to focus on ourselves. And it feels like it's not fast enough. It feels like this isn't working. You talk about that, what to say when parents say this isn't working. But really, I think it's the only thing that we can do is focus on ourselves so we can better show up for our kids. And it's not a switch. It's slow and incremental, but it's actually meaningful. It's the real change, right? It just takes as long as it takes.
Exactly. Very much.
Robyn, we're going to wrap up. I appreciate you. This went a little long, so thanks for hanging in with me. Can you, before we say goodbye, let listeners know where they can learn more about you, get your book, all the things?
Very easy to find at robyngobbel.com. You can find everything there. Pretty active on both Facebook and Instagram. You can find me easily there. And I have the podcast, The Baffling Behavior Show, all roads, robyngobbel.com. That'll take you everywhere you want to go.
Awesome. Okay, listeners, as always, I will have links in the show notes to all of those resources where you can connect with Robyn. Also, all the names that we dropped throughout the conversation, I'll include links to that as well. So thank you so much, Robyn. It was so nice to chat with you today.
You too. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with the phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at @tiltparenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
I'd like to introduce you to the Minimalist Moms podcast. It's hard enough being a mom, and the last thing you need is stress from too much stuff and an overcrowded schedule. For too long, I lived with the mindset that bigger was better, and the more I added to my life, instead of feeling better, I felt overwhelmed. It was time for a radical new mindset. Less is more. I'm not into extremes. I didn't throw everything away. My brand of minimalism is more about adding than subtracting. Get rid of the excess to make room for what you love. In other words, it's about living life with purpose. I hope you'll listen in, and my guest and myself can inspire you to think more and do with less. The Minimalist Moms podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts.